Hi everyone, so I'm here to talk to you today about the Melt Cosmetics Gemini palette and a possible affordable alternative, a dupe. So when this had came out originally, I really liked it, loved the colors in it, but it's expensive, $58 plus you have to pay shipping, and I couldn't pull the trigger. Despite those kind of olive swampy greens are so my thing, mustardy. I mean, we've got like a squashy color in here, just very much colors I love. But I was trying to talk myself into thinking, no, I have enough colors like this, don't do it. But I then wanted it, and then it was not available, and it was not clear whether or not it was ever coming back. So I signed up for stock notifications. Then I saw on Instagram they said they were going to be bringing it back, and as of right now it is still available. My understanding is this is the last time they were going to restock. I don't know if that's true. If I can find any more information about it, I will include it in the description box. But then I saw on Trend Mood, as you do, this Morphe palette. And so this is the Boss Mood 35M. And I didn't look at any super close pictures, but I'm like, oh, that's a lot of green. I wonder. So when this became available, I went ahead and purchased it from Morphe's site. I wasn't really sure if it was going to be coming to Ulta or not. I didn't really see any definitive answer on it. Turns out, yes, it's at Ulta now as well. But I did purchase it directly from Morphe, and I used Taylor's discount code, so I got 10% off. So that took it down to around $20, I think. It's $23 full price. You obviously get a lot more colors in this one. And it's a lot, less lovely of packaging, but the price is really nice, and it has a lot of different colors, and it has these swampy greens that I love. So once I got it, I was not really sure if there actually were going to be any good dupes of the Gemini palette, but once I started swatching things, I found that they actually looked a little bit more like what was in the Gemini palette than I had anticipated at first. So they do have names for the shades, but it comes on a very thin plastic thing. What I'm trying to do is just keep that up here so that I can see the shade names while I have it open. It's not a terrible solution. It's workable. If you don't do videos or Instagram or whatever, it probably doesn't really matter. But it would be nice if the names were actually on the palette themselves. But I understand that probably makes it more costly to produce. It's also kind of their cheaper plastic feel. It's not like some of the other palettes of late have been cardboard. There was the Dare to Create palette that was holiday last year, and that one was cardboard. It felt a little bit more luxe. It had similar kind of colors. It didn't have nearly as much green in it. I do appreciate that this one has a highlight shade. The Dare to Create palette had about 1 billion colors in it and no highlight colors. They were all really solidly mid-tone and darker on me, and it's kind of a bummer when there's not at least one highlight shade. So I was really happy to see that this one had a highlight shade. So the palette itself, I think, is a really nice color selection. I have not even touched any of the other colors because I was so focused on the Gemini dupe part of it. I do wonder, though, there was another palette that Melt Cosmetics put out. These two palettes were, I think, created by the founders of the brand. And so there was one called Gemini, and then there was another called 27, something like that. I'm curious if there are dupes for that palette in here as well. I'm not super familiar with what all is in that palette because it was like an orangey warm toned palette, and it wasn't anything I was looking to buy because I already have a lot of warm shades, and for that price point I'm not going to buy yet another warm toned palette. The greens, however, green hasn't been a super popular color, I would say, and I have a pretty small selection of greens like that. So as far as the specific dupes between the two palettes, I did take some notes so I could talk to you about them in a coherent manner. So the first shade in the palette in Gemini is Luna. There's not anything really even close to this one in the Morphe palette. So this one is kind of like a light on some people, maybe a highlight on some people, a transition shade, a crease shade. So there isn't really anything like that in the Morphe palette. Next up is Gemini, and this is actually the shade that I probably have had the least luck with working with, which is kind of odd because it's the namesake of the palette. It's a very pretty color, but it's just not, the sparkly bits kind of fall off your face. I did wear it yesterday I did a very similar or the exact same look yesterday, but with Gemini in the center of my lid. I did just foil the shadow, so I wet my brush and when I applied it, and it definitely hung on well. I didn't have fallout. So if you're going to be using a shade like this, like the shade I used today, I would definitely recommend using it wet. The shade I have on today, Goals, had fallout, but it was a lot easier to work with. So there isn't a direct dupe of this shade in the Morphe palette. There's one that's kind of similar, and it is called Bright Eyes, and it's definitely more orange versus peach. So here is Bright Eyes, and it's definitely more of an orangey color. The shimmer in it isn't quite the same. It has a little bit different of kind of sparkly colors in it. And then next up, Lorelei. Also not an exact dupe in this palette. This is starting out kind of not very exciting. I know this one's what I think of as kind of butternut squash. I don't know why specifically butternut squash, but it's just a very pretty kind of mustardy, orangey, yellowy color. There isn't anything that's directly similar. There's the shade Fired Up, which is more straight orange. I think it might look a little bit more similar in the pan than it does actually swatched, and this is what I had as my comparison swatch on my arm. And then there is Peachy Keen, which is just more brown versus kind of a mustardy, orangey, brown, yellow. Next up on the Gemini palette is Polka Dot. There are two that are really similar in the Morphe palette. So Polka Dot is right here. It's a very warm, kind of mid-toned brown. And there are two that are pretty similar, Peachy Keen and Play It Cool. I don't think either one, I think Peachy Keen might be a tiny bit closer, and then Play It Cool is right here. Basically, these two shades are super, super similar. I don't even know if you would see much of a difference when you're using them on your eye. Maybe the undertone differences would come out on your eyes, but I feel like they're pretty similar and also very similar to the Polka Dot shade. Cupcake is, I feel like when I actually swatched it, it looked a little different than I was expecting. And I feel like it looks a little bit more neutral in the pan, but then swatches a little bit more cool. It's a very pretty color. And it does remind me of cocoa powder. There's a certain kind of undertone that cocoa powder has, and I feel like there's a little bit of that in there. It's kind of like a purpley something or other. And the color that I felt like was a really good dupe of Cupcake is Sparks Fly. And this was one that I feel like in the pan looks a little bit more like what I think it's going to swatch like, and these two are pretty nice comparable shades. In Gemini, the black color is called Bonnie, and it's a very nicely pigmented black. The black in the Morphe palette is called Black Magic. Let me hold this more carefully. And I could not get it to build up to be more than a gray on my swatch on my arm. I tried probably 7 or 8 layers and it just would not build on itself. But I'm guessing it's one of those shades that's probably going to work at least somewhat better over a base. My only concern would be how patchy it is, whatever. I don't use blacks very often except for like creating kind of a liner with an eyeshadow. So, in that case, when it's like really, really kind of weakly pigmented, then you can't really do that because it won't really show up. So it's not a huge deal to me because I don't use black as part of my look all that often except for a liner, but it is notable that I really had a hard time with that shade. And then we get to the greens, which were the part that I like the most. They aren't like the biggest part of this palette, but I feel like they're the most eye-catching part. So Leo here, it's a deeper green, and there isn't an exact dupe in this one, but if you use this shade Green with Envy and you mix it up a little bit with Nude, it gets something very similar. The Green with Envy shade is a little bit more kind of charcoaly, and you might be able to see that in the swatch that I have. So by itself, it's not exactly as, it's really not an exact dupe for Leo because it doesn't have quite enough green to it, but just by mixing those two shades, I feel like you get a really good approximate result of what Leo is. And I felt like on the eyes it was pretty easy to get that same result. Next is Goals, and this is a very pretty shimmery kind of mid-toned green, I would say. It seems like it has a little bit of gold shimmer in it and the kind of a yellowy greeny gold. And in the Morphe palette, this one has a very similar shade, and it is called Bold Moves right here. And this one definitely I had to build up quite a bit more to get the same intensity. Goals goes on really easily. I just applied it with my finger. The downside of this product and not using it wet was that I have had a fair amount of that kind of gold sparkly stuff fall out. It's kind of like a teeny tiny glitter in that way, that it doesn't really adhere that well unless you use it wet. A lot of shimmer shades these days seem to be that way, where they're composed more of glitter type particles as opposed to just being like a shimmer, which I feel like historically hasn't had as much fallout. I don't know. This is one definitely on both sides I would use wet just to keep it from moving around. If you don't mind if you have a little bit of fallout, then I feel like both of them can be built up. The Gemini shade doesn't really need any work to build it up. The Morphe shade I did have to layer about 3 or 4 times with my finger, but I feel like the end result ended up being the same. Another super pretty, quite unique shade in this palette is Fire OG, and it's a little bit more brownish green khaki type color, and I felt that the Nude color really similar, and I feel like on the eyes it's not quite as intense. It doesn't translate as deep, I think, on the eyes, but the color tone is really similar. And so in order to kind of replicate the look I was getting with just Fire OG, again, I just dipped into Green with Envy a little bit and darkened it up a little bit. So I feel like between these shades you can really replicate something similar to Leo and Fire OG. And then the last shade, I was thinking that there wasn't going to be anything similar to this one because it's such an interesting color. It's called Mochi, and on the eyes I feel like I can really see the yellow on my particular coloring. At least I feel like the yellow really comes out, and it's just such a cool, like, yellowy mustardy light green. It's such a cool color, and I didn't think that there was going to be something that would work the same, because I feel like in the pans, Hello Sunshine is the one that we're looking at for a comparable shade. I feel like in the pan they don't look that similar, but I was really surprised. They swatch and go in the eyes very similarly. There's enough of the kind of yellowy tone to it. I feel like the Morphe color doesn't look as warm, but on the eyes it ends up being really similar. So those are the colors. Those are your alternatives. Not an exact dupe for everything, and not everything was an exact dupe, but can you tell which is which on my eyes? Because I feel like I was able to get pretty much the same look on both eyes with separate palettes. So we can just look at quickly how I applied this look to my eyes. I used separate brushes. I kind of struggled a little bit with the application because I was using brushes that I don't normally use, just because I wanted to use separate ones. So what I did first was on my Gemini eye, which is on my left side, my right side, your left side. I started out with Mochi, and I put that all throughout the crease. This was kind of my transition shade, if you will, my beginning of my crease. On the Morphe side, which is your right side, my left side. On the Morphe side, I went in with Play It Cool and put that throughout the crease. I feel like it looked pretty similar. And then next I went in with Fire OG from Gemini on the Gemini eye, and I really kind of, that packed it on quite a lot. I was using this e.l.f. This brush I had put away because I presumably don't like it all that much. This e.l.f. contour brush, it's like kind of painful to use, and it really packs a lot of product on at one time. And then on the other eye, I was using a little bit fluffier of a brush, so I'm kind of curious if I had changed it where I used a little fluffier brush on the Gemini side and the slightly more dense brush on the Boss Mood side, if it would have worked out looking a little bit more similar from the get-go. Not really sure. I felt like the depth wasn't quite the same from using just Nude, so I did eventually mix in a little bit of the Green with Envy just to darken it up a little bit. And then I think I went into the lid shade next. And so on the Gemini side, I used Goals. The comparable shade to Gemini is this one, and it is called Bold Moves. And it's very, very similar, though this one I had to build up a lot more. And I feel like it also has maybe a tiny bit of like a peachy gold reflect to it, whereas the Gemini one just has kind of a straight yellow gold reflect. So I don't know that I can really... I can see it a little bit in person. This side looks a little bit more lime green, and this one's kind of green with like a peachy color. Honestly, I like the color in the Morphe palette a teeny bit more, just because I feel like that little bit of warmth makes it a little bit easier for me to wear, actually. But they are very, very similar, just with that slight difference. And then I decided I wanted to use another color, basically, is the reason I went in with this one. So I added a little bit of Leo to my crease on my Gemini side, just to kind of deepen everything up a little bit more. And then I went in with mostly Green with Envy from the Morphe palette. And then just both of them, I kind of blended a little, added a little more Fire OG, more Nude, just to kind of diffuse a little bit of that depth and just kind of try to blend it all together a little. On my lower lash line, I kept it super simple. I went in with Mochi, and then I used a like push liner brush to put down a little bit of Fire OG. And then on the Morphe side, I went in with Hello Sunshine, and then I mixed Nude and Green with Envy. I just did 2 taps in Nude and 1 tap in Green with Envy, and just put that on my lower lash line. And I feel like the finished look really is so similar. I did use Light of the Party, the highlight shade from the Morphe palette. I used that on my inner corner on both eyes. So altogether, I was really happy with how the finished look came out. I feel like you can see a little bit small differences, but the overall look, I feel like, is totally doable to replicate the greens from Gemini with this Morphe Boss Mood palette. I know not everyone is a huge fan of Morphe, and I totally get that, but if you are looking for some of those really funky, cool green colors in the Gemini palette and you don't want to spend the money on it, or it's not available anymore, I feel like the Morphe Boss Mood is awesome. If you're looking for somebody's code to use that you would like to support, I strongly suggest using Taylor's code. Who doesn't love Taylor? She is awesome. And you can also buy it at Ulta, so you can get, points for buying it at Ulta if you are part of their rewards program, which you have to be. I mean, that's like half the reason to shop at Ulta. Do you have any plans of picking up either of these palettes? Have you tried either of these palettes? I would love to hear from you in the comments. Did you have a guess as to which eye was which before I told you? So yeah, I would love to hear your feedback, guys. Let me know. I don't normally do these kinds of videos, but it was just like this palette called out to me so much, and then I found something that seemed like it was going to be a much cheaper dupe, and I just couldn't help myself. So I had to snag it up and talk about it as soon as I could. So let me know if you have any questions or comments. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to watch my video. I really appreciate it. And anytime you leave a like or a comment, subscribe. That's awesome. Thank you so much. If you want to see more stuff from me, then please do subscribe. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.